Three fader technique for bass on a metal production. The three fader is very useful. It works kind of like a multiband compressor. Each fader or each channel will represent a frequency range that's processed slightly different than the other. And with these three together, you're supposed to have a present, always available, always powerful bass, just pummeling through your mix basically. The first fader, as you can see in my mix here, the first fader would be for the sub. Let's look at the EQ. Basically the sub is any frequency below the fundamental. Let's press play here. So the fundamental's playing here. I shaved it off all the way to keep the lows. This energy here is going to fight with the kick. So I'm going to show you later how that's going to be balanced out. The second one being the body. Which is a bass amp. We use the SVT 3 here. And the third one being the distortion. Which is made of the dark glass. You can have fun with this. It doesn't have to be the dark glass. I've had success using literally anything that produces distortion. I prefer this one. It does sound good, but I've also had a lot of success with the others. The kick and the bass, they're gonna fight for presence, right? They both exist, or they both have sub-frequencies, and that usually tends to muddy up a mix. So what you need to do is put them both in the same bus, or have one side chained to the other. Both of these will address the issue of masking. They'll sound slightly different. You're gonna have to try both and see which one works out. The other thing to consider here would be the distortion guitars. Distortion guitars are notoriously known to suck energy out of all the tracks. So there's two ways to address this. Way number one, poke holes in the distortion guitar bus so that the bass pops. By poke holes, I mean using an EQ and shaving some frequencies off. Use your ears to decide which, so the bass will pop out. Another way is to distort the bass, and that's where the dark glass comes in handy. So we talked about the sub and the distortion. This is going to be working with the bass, or with the kick, and this is going to be working with the guitars. The middle one, of course, is the body. That's the amp sound. That's where the frequency itself, the fundamental, and its harmonics live. All these need to be presented a whole all the time. Let's open the EQs here. Let's address how I approached the shaving. Of course, completely using my ears, right? I tend to turn off the analyzer here. Sometimes I turn them on, then I turn them off when I'm deciding by my ear. And it's basically basing my judgment completely on the speakers. And as you can see, I've shaved off under the 117. If we go to the amp, I'm shaving up over 126. It might appear here that there's a big gap, and this is where all the fundamentals supposedly live. Let's play that. So it might seem that I made a huge hole here in that region, but because there are still summing, even though I did shave it off, right? Not that much. It really depends on perspective here. So it's not that much, especially if you look at the bus of the bass. See, it exists just fine. So this is why you shouldn't EQ based on the spectrum. Use your ears and see which curve works for you and which frequency. Again, use your ears, have good monitors, and you should be able to decide that quite simply. So for the sub, I cut everything under the fundamentals, and I made sure it exists successfully or in tandem with the amp, cutting off just as much as I need to based on my listening. Now, Of course, both of these signals are all from the same DI, same with the distortion. It's just that the first plugin changes here. So here's your amp signal. How did it decide on choosing these settings? Step number one should always be your cab. Choose the correct cab and then go to the EQ and the gain. Of course, how do you set those? Depends on your mix. The gain, how much distortion you want. Tube gain gives you a different kind of distortion. So start with the cab, then jump in the gain and EQ section and base your judgment on the mix. Of course, you gotta use your ears. Another way to approach this is simply just go to the presets and choose which one you like a little more. There's no shame in using presets when it comes to bass tone. Why not, right? So the sub was shaved off as much as I needed it to be shaved off. The amp as much as it needed. You always start with the cab, jump to the EQ and the gain. Now the distortion. I think I rarely choose a distortion setting that I regret. Usually it always works just fine. Again, you have your EQ and your drive section. I do bypass the cab option here by right clicking, and I just focus on the EQ and the distortion. And the level of it, of course, depends on the whole mix. So let's hear each one by itself. Here's you probably need headphones to pick up those subs. Here's the low frequency. And all of them at the same time. Excellent. So let's forget the master or the bus of it here. As you can see, I have auto align deactivated. Well, they are in phase. The signals are in phase at start. Each one is identical, but I did EQ them and I used 0 latency for the processing. That means there's going to be a lot of phase. I judge the polarity by, just clicking the polarity here, right? But there is going to be alignment issues. That means they're going to be moved. Now, just the polarity, literally, they're going to move because I did some hard shaving off here. So if you're not familiar with the auto line, it will detect those shifts and it will fix them. And I usually do that after I choose all these settings and judge by my ear. Send the signal from the amp and receive it from the rest. Of course, I've already done this. This is already done. But let's do it again. It might have changed, or I might have used a template. So let's do it again. I'm going to reset everything here. Reset. Yep, detect polarity and delay. Yes, no phase inversion. And let's detect. Excellent. So it detected that the distortion needs to be brought back 34 samples, no phase invert because I already done that, and it detected that the I needs to be pushed forward by 103. As you can see, I was pretty close. It must have been because of course, I deactivate the plugin and I apply the shifts here. It's just so that I'm not using a lot of delay on the CPU. So that's why it's the same result. You could also nudge them into the values. So it's the same thing, really, doesn't matter. As you can see, I'm pretty close. The reason why they're slightly off could be because I was checking them in another section, which might give different readings. That is normal, but it's pretty close. I'm going to keep them as they are. I'm pretty sure I decided these numbers for another part. All right, so let's just deactivate these. Just showing how it's done. So 3 faders. They're designed They're high passed and low passed, and they're aligned. Now they're entering into your main bus. Let's start off with an EQ. I got some shaping and some fitting. By shaping means I just did a little boost. Some offending frequencies have been removed. Also, might be masking other instruments. So this is how this decision is done. This is based on ear completely. There's nothing for you to copy here. Pro multiband, which is used a lot with my mixes. So let's press play and see where the frequencies exist here. Let's remove the solo. Okay. Now, the kick is sidechained into the 60 region. And you might think, why 60? Sorry about that. So why 60? 60 is your energy region. And I don't want the kick and bass to fight over the energy. I want them to coexist just equally. So I sent the kick, which is pretty balanced because it's compressed a lot, into the sidechain of the bass bus, right? And it's pushing it down. This is for the 60 region. The low mid or the fundamental region, that's where the fundamental exists. Of course, I just want it to be balanced. It's not sidechained to the kick or anything. This is by itself. This is my favorite setting for a bass. Almost always works perfectly. To tell you the compression, the attack, release, and ratio settings of these mean nothing to you. Why is that? Well, this song is played in C standard. This song is about 190 BPMs. So the settings are based on these. Also, I was the performer of the bass. So it won't make a lot of sense to copy the exact same settings. That's not how it works. So if you look here, put it on the slowest attack and the fastest release. The ratio, I usually set it with my controller. I don't even pay attention to the numbers. So again, you have to use by ears. Same thing comes to the mid. These settings will change from song to song, believe it or not. So again, there's nothing to copy completely, but for this one, there's 10% on the attack, 20% on the release. The ratio, 3.61. Again, this is all based on listening, right? I like to use a controller and just adjust them. It works better for me to have a hands-on approach. Cool. Then we're jumping on to the L3 LL Ultra. So pretty much this is a limiter, right? Except it's a multiband limiter. I've seen this with Waves, L3 LL. There's a bunch of them. And with Plugin Alliance. And the way it works is like this, right? It's kind of like having 16 limiters working in parallel to one another, not in series, next to each other. And each one of these limiters is working on one or a specific frequency range. This means you could set different priorities or attack or release on each one of these limiters, basically giving you more control. With this one, it's quite simpler. It is a multiband limiter, but instead of choosing a lot of these parameters, they are just presetted here. I usually don't pay a lot of attention to it. I usually go for cozy and warm. That means the limiters will work. Many of these limiters will work in a way to make it more cozy and warm. Of course, you could choose which one works for you the most. But besides that concept, the threshold and ceiling are set the same way. This type of limiter usually annihilates a signal. So if you hear it by itself, it's going to be horrible because it's like extreme limiting. In the context of the mix, it works very well. I remember seeing Jens use it one time, and it was very intriguing to me. I saw one of his videos somewhere online, and then as soon as I used it, it totally worked. So credits to him for that tip. So So I use it at the end. How do you set this? Let me just go to, there we go. Usually I'll do something like that. I'll remove the solo, listen to the bass, drop it at the same time, and what's going to happen is going to start balancing all the frequencies. It's basically kind of like EQing and compressing at the same time, but in a very extreme way. Once I like it, I'll set the levels, and that's that. So let's do this really quickly right now. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to stick to A because I put more focus on it. But generally, that's my approach. You push it down until it's annihilated. And it's working with the mix just quite well. And then set the output. That's it. Nothing else you need to do. And of course, I put the SSL on top of it. Probably just to give it some boost in the highs. Probably for the mix. So that's about it. That would be my base production approach. So to recap, it's your basic 3 fader method. Shave them off, then align them. When you're choosing the bass amp, start with the cab or just work with the presets and work with the EQ and gain later. You can't go wrong with the Dark Glass. It's an excellent plugin. Again, I've had successes using a lot of other plugins. It didn't have to be the Dark Glass. Have fun with this one. I usually like to also have fun with Heavy Pedal from Audiority. Can't pronounce it. I have a lot of fun with this one as well. Lots of successes. And of course, blend them. Then when the main bus, you're gonna have the EQ, shaping and fitting, multiband, it's doing 2 things at the same time, and then annihilate it. All the settings here are based on my mix, my tempo, my tuning, okay? All of them working together. You should find your own mix. I've had a lot of successes with this approach, and I'm sure you've seen it online a lot. A big tip here is use good monitoring to make these judgments. If you don't have a treated room, maybe get yourself some headphones for the sub, because it's difficult to hear it and judge properly in a room that's not treated and slightly noisy, because that frequency is more felt than heard. So you need a sub or something. You need to figure that out. And again, don't rely a lot on your spectrum analyzer. It does usually give you the exact right results. Use your ears. The Pro Q3 tends to show you like a red line when there's frequency masking. Let me show you what I mean. Let's just do this. You could do this technique here where you could sidechain the image. See how it gave you a red color here as if it's masking? Yeah, never rely on that, because masking doesn't necessarily mean masking from the same frequencies. Sometimes the 100 could be masked by the 1000. The Pro Q is showing you simply the same frequencies, and it rarely is the case. Usually other frequencies mask the lower frequency. So again, I've said this like a million times, focus on your ears more than anything else. And you might as well turn this off as well. Put them on when you need to, but if you're EQing precisely, just ignore them. So thanks for watching. For your support, please like and subscribe to this page. Also follow me on Instagram, which is Slepsh Productions, or on Bandcamp, which is slepsh.bandcamp.com. See ya.